Hey everyone, Tin Man here, back with another episode of Precise Plays, the series where I review my gameplay in dungeons and raids, call out mistakes, look for opportunities for improvement, and also do play-by-play analysis. So today we've got Mists of Tirna Scithe on plus 14 with Spiteful, Fortified, and Grievous as the affixes for the week. So this run, all things considered, does go pretty smoothly, I think. But there's a number of issues that I had kind of with my UI in this, so I want to really highlight that here. I'm playing my Fire Mage, as Fire seems to be the preferred mage spec in the current balance tuning. I know I've played a lot of Frost Mage before, but really that hasn't been able to compete with Fire Mages in general. So right on the first pull, we pop Combustion, and these guys leap around, so it's a little bit hard. Normally when you have like 4 or 5 enemies in one pack, you want to be using Combustion on Flame Strike, but I knew these guys would be jumping around, so I didn't do that until the end, and then kind of used some of the last charges on Flame Strike there. And also, when each of those little guys die, they apply a curse to nearby allies. And so, as a mage or a shaman or anybody else who could remove curses, you definitely want to be removing the curse off of your tank in particular, because that curse makes them take bonus damage. Although you can get that on anybody at any time. So here's kind of one of my first issues with the UI that I have here. You see the nameplates on this next pack. There are a number of notable casts going on here, like the Soul Bolt, and you really want to be interrupting that if possible. And I tried to interrupt it, but I missed target because the enemy nameplates here are really overlapping a whole lot. You can see when you click on whoever my target is, that's going to be big and bolded, and that kind of obscures the other enemies in the pack, so I can't quite see, who's casting or who has low HP, and that did lead me to use my counterspell on the wrong target, and so that was definitely a mistake that is very frustrating when you're like, okay, I know I want to counter this, and you try to click on it, but you're just like a pixel or two off or whatever it is, and you target the wrong enemy, you waste your kick, and on really high keys that can lead to a wipe here. We did lose our tank, but luckily we're so close to the front of the dungeon that he can just release and run back. We can kite around, and it's not a disaster by any means to miss that one kick, but it's definitely frustrating to miss out on something like that when just because I have this overlapping in my nameplates. So that's one UI element that definitely is kind of recurring frustration throughout this dungeon that I'm definitely wanting to look into trying to fix. So going into this next pack here, we decided to grab the buffs before doing this this pack of 4 enemies here. These 4 are really tough. They hit the tank really hard, and there's also multiple enemies you need to interrupt and their casts. Otherwise, they could really punish your whole group. So we decided to grab these buffs, which is a 10% damage buff, basically 10% intellect buff, before pulling here. So in this pack, I do have Combustion up a second or two after pulling, so we get right into the Combustion rotation. And just like before, since there are 4 targets here that all have roughly equal priority, I do try to use my Hot Streaks during Combustion on the Flame Strike, but unfortunately the tank is kiting out the mobs here that hit the tank really hard, not the casters. And that's a problem because obviously they're moving out of my Flame Patch, so I probably should have just converted to using Pyroblasts on the casters in the back before keep on spamming these Flame Strikes, knowing that the tank wanted to be kiting out like this. And so I definitely lost a lot of damage. Every time one of these mobs moves out of the Flame Patch on the ground, I'm losing quite a bit of damage. And of course, after the pack, you also have to make sure that you're kiting these shades properly. As a mage, that's a really big part of your responsibility, is to like Frost Nova them or Dragon's Breath them and just kind of make sure they don't mess up your melee DPS too terribly much. So in this next pack here, there are 2 of these bow breakers, and you definitely want to be watching their cast here for when they cast the Bramble Patch, because that's when you need to be moving away from these black areas that'll spawn on the ground underneath you. Unfortunately, once again, my UI kind of betrays me here. As you can see, the nameplates are overlapping, and the one that I'm not targeting, it's really hard to see when he's casting, and I can tell when the one that I'm targeting is casting, but the other one is much more difficult to see what's going on there. As this pack goes on, I do start dropping pretty low as they're both putting out these furious thrashes, and I'm also a little slow to move out of the bramble patches, so I'm taking a little bit of extra damage, and I definitely make a mistake in not using some of my defensives here. I do have like mirror images that could reduce damage taken by 20%. I could use my blazing barrier to give myself a 20% HP shield. Unfortunately, I don't do any of those, but luckily our healer is able to keep up with most of us, even though the rogue does die and has to make a little run back while we're cleaning up the pack here. I'm also making the same mistake that I made in the last pack, where I'm using Flame Strike in a lot of cases with the 2 targets, and the tank is just constantly kiting out of them. I definitely should have just converted to using Pyroblasts on the 1 priority target, the one that was lower HP, just to make sure I get as much damage as possible, and it doesn't matter if he's kiting out of the Flame Patches or not, even though if there were 2 perfectly stationary targets, you would definitely want to do the Flame Strikes. As we get the Manifestation of Pride here, it's pretty simple to just stack up in the healing rain, and once you see the orientation of the arrows, you just kind of get in a line at a 45-degree angle like we are, so that nobody will ever get hit by them. The Shaman here does move a little bit. He could have just stayed put, but decides to move over, so you have to be ready to adjust to that. I do use Combustion on that at the end of that pull, because I know I don't want to have Combustion up for the start of this boss fight. I want to have it once this tall Droman here is brought down to low HP, because then it'll apply a debuff to the main boss, Ingra Malok, that will increase his damage taken. So you want to have Combustion up about 30-ish seconds, 30 or 40 seconds into the fight. Depends on how quick your damage is on the Droman here. And so this fight is pretty easy if you can just do it in one phase. You just focus the big guy and then make sure you have Combustion up for Ingra. But unfortunately, my Combustion is coming up here in just a second, so I'm a little bit delayed. I did lose some time of that bonus damage on Ingra Malok here, and so I actually think that might actually punish us, because we're not going to get this done in one phase. If you could have dropped him a little bit lower, you potentially could just burn him instead of burning Droman here to finish off the fight. But since I didn't quite have enough burst, you can see that the damage meter in the bottom right, our Hunter and Rogue have a lot more damage than me in this fight, because they pumped a lot more into that damage phase. But since my Combustion was delayed, that put us a little bit behind. No matter though, we're just kind of cleaving both of them down, although we definitely should be focusing on the skull target, the tall Droman here, because we're not going to be able to kill Ingra Malok in time before he becomes functionally immune to damage when he casts this Embrace Death. So that's when you need to swap off to Droman here. When one of the targets is below 30% HP though, it can be correct to be constantly swapping targets and kind of casting Scorch on the lower HP target, so you can get the guaranteed heating up proc, and then if you can swap targets quickly enough, you would like Fire Blast and Pyroblast onto the main target, and then just keep spamming Scorch as your cast ability on the 30% HP target, which I tried to do a little bit there, but they both got down to the same HP at roughly the same time. So as we go into the next phase of the dungeon, the maze here, if you're Night Fae, you definitely want to unlock this little skip here. I actually messed it up for the first time, so I got to channel again. You got to make sure you click that dialogue option, and this will unlock a checkpoint. So if one of your team members die, they'll just respawn right there rather than back at the start of the whole dungeon, which obviously is a big pain to run that far back. Luckily, the tank is tanking most of these guys right in place, and so they're staying in my flame patch, and I'm getting pretty good damage here, even though I don't have any cooldowns up. I'm not using like combustion or anything, still pulling some pretty good damage. And of course, once they drop below 30% HP, that's when you want to be spamming the Scorches to get the single target damage. Always got to be careful about Spiteful though, especially as a DPS player. If you're just too focused on the one target, then you won't notice that these guys are spawn and they take like half your HP in one swing. So you got to make sure you're kiting them and freezing them as we go through the maze here. So in this next pack is the recurring problem of stacking up nameplates and kind of a bad camera angle. You see I kind of adjust my camera angle and zoom in a little bit just so I can kind of get these nameplates spread out a bit more and kind of see who I'm targeting, who has low HP, and who might be casting a spell that I might need to interrupt here. I do pull off aggro on one of these stalkers who I'm single targeting with my combustion rotation, so that's very scary, and I drop very low. Luckily I get some pretty good heals and I get my blazing barrier out just to top myself up, but that was very risky. Whenever you have that burst combo with combustion, it does a ton of damage, especially if you're single targeting, and there's a very real chance of pulling aggro off your tank if you don't let them get aggro for a long enough time, or you're targeting somebody who they're not targeting, so you always have to be careful with that. In this next room, I take a massive chunk of damage here from this Mistveil Stalker. The Mistveil Bite deals 24k damage to me. I was at full HP, and I dropped so low that I popped Cauterize within like 1 or 2 global cooldowns of that ability going off. It kind of razzled me, and I dropped my Flame Strike in an area where the tank had already kited out of before popping my Ice Block. And so I'm not sure if that ability is bugged. I don't feel like it's supposed to hit that hard on a 14, dealing basically 100% of my HP within 2 or 3 seconds. But if that is the case, I definitely want to look into making some kind of notification when, hey, you're targeted by this ability. So, pre-cast that offensive ability, like say the Mirror Images or Blazing Barrier or even Ice Block ahead of time, even if you're at full HP, just because you want to be really careful to not get one shot by that, especially as I push up into higher keys than a 14. I do want to make a quick note about the combustion that I used at the tail end of that pack there, so let's rewind to see what went wrong there. So first off, I delay it a little bit to make sure that I have 2 Fire Blast charges. I could have just, not used the Fire Blast earlier, so that I would have had 2 as soon as combustion comes up off cooldown, but instead I have to wait a little bit. I pop it pretty quickly after getting to 2 charges, but it's already at the tail end of the pack, so like the damage is not that effective since these targets are pretty close to dying anyway, and I could have just done my Scorch Execute rotation. I mess up a bunch of casts here. I end up canceling 2 of my Pyroblast casts. I thought they would go off because the target is walking through me, so he ends up being behind me as I try to finish my cast, so it cancels it, and then I don't get the appropriate procs off, and it's just a complete mess. So and I also have to move away from shades and other things, so I move out of my Rune of Power. It's just a really bad situation. So I would definitely do a lot of things different there. I would have not used combustion right off the bat. I would have saved it for the start of the next pack. And if I did it, I would have kind of preferred to move further away so that nobody's going to walk through me and get behind me while I'm trying to do it. And I also have more room that I don't need to kite the shades out of my Rune of Power right away. In the next room, I obviously won't have combustion up since I used it on the end of the last pack, so I get up nice and close so I can drop my Rune of Power into Shifting Power so I can get the most AoE damage out. Do you have to be worried about these anima injections that are going out so you're not standing in the circle with someone else, because that will deal some splash damage if it's not dispelled by the healer. And I do get knocked back a little bit, and I try to run back in, which really there's no point for me getting this close anymore. I was just there for the Shifting Power, and I actually get punished for it as I get hit by a shade as he pops right up. And now I'm out of position for the Manifestation of Pride. I actually get hit by the shade twice. I could have Frost Nova'd a little bit earlier to avoid getting hit by that. But luckily, our healer bails us out of those problems, and we can get back in our little line once those arrows come out so that we don't get hit too terribly bad. I do use combustion here at the tail end of the Manifestation of Pride just to burn him down real quick. You don't want him living very long, and some of our damage was a little bit spread on the ads that were still up. It's a little bit unfortunate that it's kind of unpredictable the exact percentage you get as you go through this maze, so it's not always possible to plan getting a Manifestation of Pride at the end of a pack. Sometimes you get it halfway through, and you just have to be able to deal with that. In the next room, we'll do the same thing. We're going to get up nice and close so that I can use Rune of Power into Shifting Power to get the most AoE damage. I actually have to do Shifting Power first since Rune of Power is not quite up yet. And then we're just spamming Flame Strikes and Fire Blasts to get instant cast Flame Strikes as much as possible here. Although once I'm done with the Shifting Power and the Rune of Power, there's really no reason for me to be up this close. I can definitely afford to stay back and just give myself more room to deal with the Spiteful ads as they come up. I am actually like inching forward here kind of for no reason. This is definitely not, I don't need to do this. I'm casting Scorch. I could freely move backwards or sideways, but instead I keep on inching forward right towards this shade who hits me for 40% of my HP. And I feel like an idiot as I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably run away. And I run away to check the sides of the room so we can figure out where the next one is. I do like to cast fireballs on these shades as you're far away, and you can just afford to get free cast off. If the fireball does crit, you do get the 2.5 seconds off your combustion due to the kindling talent. So if you have the chance, just a free second or two, it's kind of worth it to just cast a free fireball like that to maybe get some cooldown reduction. Here in the next room, we start off with Combustion into the Flame Strike version of the rotation, where you spend the hot streaks on Flame Strike. That does use your instant casts pretty quick, so you got to use Scorch a little bit more and to throw out those Flame Strikes. Unfortunately, the ads spread out near the end of the pack here, so as I'm trying to get up to use my Rune of Power into Shifting Power, I don't quite... actually, I do hit everybody with that, so that works out pretty well. I have to throw out that Frost Nova a little bit early just to keep everybody in place and help the tank kite a little bit. I accidentally start hardcasting a Pyroblast here, but it's the very end of the pack and he dies a second later, so no real damage done there. As I'm going around the room trying to figure out where the next path is, you actually don't need to on this very last one. If you keep count of how many rooms you've gone through, and if you check the map and you see that you're right next to the boss room, the final path will go into the boss room, so that actually narrows it down. And so I used to be check the map there. I'm just like, oh yeah, we are next to the boss room. Going into the Mist Color boss here, I have about 22 seconds left on my combustion, and that doesn't mean I should be pooling my Fire Blast charges. I shouldn't be using them right away, but I am using them to trigger Hot Streak, and when it's this close to combustion coming back up, I really should not be doing it that close. I should be pooling them here, because you see as combustion comes off cooldown, I actually have 0 Fire Blast charges at the moment it comes off cooldown, and so I have to wait until you have at least 2. Kind of like 2.5 is what would be the sweet spot for when you use combustion, and so I'm waiting here until we have about 2.5, and then I pop it. But this is going to come back and bite me, because the damage, it pushes her into the guessing game phase where she becomes immune to damage, and that means I'm wasting like 2 or 3 seconds of that on the tail end of that combustion, basically trying to figure out who I should be targeting, and that's a time when I need to be doing a lot of my damage, and because I didn't properly pool the Fire Blast before that, I lose out on quite a bit of damage here. It's a little bit unfortunate there. I was channeling my shifting power, where I have to kind of stay put for 3.5 seconds, and I get hit by the dodgeball because I couldn't dodge while I'm standing still channeling. I thought I moved in time at the end, but that comes out ridiculously fast, and I should not have started channeling a shifting power there. There are timers for boss abilities. I use bigwigs, but other people use like DBM. And I should have just known that, hey, this is coming up in the next few seconds. Don't start a 3-second channel there. I just honestly did not pay close enough attention to that. I make the same mistake here with my next combustion going into a guessing game. I don't have the Fire Blasts available. I just had one, so I have to delay it. But that kind of works, as I'm able to really burst down the target here. And I learned my lesson from the dodgeball. I look behind to dodge it, but that's also where my UI kind of betrays me a little bit. Notice I had to turn the camera to the left to see that dodgeball coming up, because my unit frames were in the way, my party frames, and that's something that I think is just really obscuring kind of like the left half of my vision in these fights. That like if there's somebody standing a few yards to my left, I just can't see them. Like the wolf here that's just off to my left, I have to adjust my camera to make sure it's not hidden behind my player frame, and that it causes problems sometimes for me. And I've seen other UIs that are a lot cleaner, kind of on the left and right of your character. I have it like pretty clean above and like in front of my character, but to the left and right, I definitely have some trouble kind of seeing some of the things, like what characters overlapped in that healing rain. I couldn't quite tell, and if there was some ability like on Prideful, I sometimes can't see it, and so that does represent a problem that I think I want to address as I'm looking to kind of redesign my UI. At the tail end of this boss, I do pop combustion, only get about 5-6 seconds of useful damage out of it, so probably a mistake there. I was just trying to finish off the boss as quickly as possible. Not really necessary, because the end of that boss is pretty easy, and now I'm going to have a second or a minute and a half of cooldown on combustion going into the next pack here. I know there's a little bit of RP, a little bit of kind of travel time to the next pack, so I thought, okay, well, we'll make sure it's cooling down during that time, but it really was kind of unnecessary. I'm not going to have it up for this first pack, and I definitely could have if I didn't blow it at the last 5 seconds or 6 seconds of the previous boss. So I get it nice and close so that I can do the Rune of Power and a Shifting Power combo. That you do want to be targeting down the Stag Helm here. He does hit pretty hard and does have those casts that you want to be interrupting, so he's the primary target. So while I am using the Flame Strikes, you want to make sure you're targeting him first, and with any kind of single target effects. So as we finish up this pack here, I do start inching forward just a little bit to make sure that I can be in position whenever the Prideful ad does spawn. I know after we kill off, I think it's 2 out of these 3, then the Prideful will spawn, but luckily we're AoEing them all down, so they'll die at roughly the same time. Do have to be very wary about the shades though, that's why I'm not getting quite up into melee. Luckily none of them target me, and I can get a Frost Nova out to help everybody else. I do want to be stacked up nice and close to make it easier on our healers. And there is a bit of a problem here though with like I said, with the UI. You see here on the left, our shaman comes back in Ghost Wolf form and just lines it up perfectly with me and stuns me, and I don't even notice until I get stunned, because he's like kind of right in between my player frames, and I don't even see it. I know it for the second time, and I'm able to dodge out. I kind of change my angle to look at it, but that's something that, I mean, on one hand, you shouldn't be moving that much with the Prideful buff, so that you would accidentally hit somebody like that and they wouldn't have time to react. But on the other hand, I should have been able to see it if I didn't have the raid frames kind of so big and opaque and just kind of blocking that field of view for me. So that, along with the stacking up nameplates issue, is something I definitely want to look into, a way to improve and optimize. And so that might be my next video, is looking at how to improve my UI for those particular elements and some other elements as well. The rest of the trash in this dungeon is pretty much a lot of the more of the same of what we are seeing right here. So I'm actually going to just skip ahead to the last boss because honestly not a whole lot interesting happens between now and then. So we're going to go ahead a few minutes. There are two things I want to mention with this boss. The first one is that once again I didn't pool enough fire blasts going into the combustion. I used a couple in the execute phase of the prideful ad right beforehand. And so that punished me on my opener. I didn't have quite as many fire blasts, even though we used time warp and they had a quicker recharge time. I just didn't have enough, and I accidentally cast a hard cast pyre blast there at the end or after combustion finished up. So definitely need to work on improving that because that's been a big problem throughout a lot of the dungeons here. Is that I want to go into combustion with 2 or 3 fire blast charges, but I often don't have that many. I only have like 0 or 1. The other thing is these green swirlies that leave like the gunk on the ground that you've got to dodge. I've been running this dungeon since Shadowlands came out, and I only just realized how they work. They actually they remember how you dodged the first time. So you saw on that one, it spawned one to the right and to the back right. And if you watch the first time I did it, I dodged to the right, and then the second time to the back right. And then this time I dodged forward and then to the left. So the next one that comes out here in a few seconds, it's going to have a green swirly that goes to the right, the back right, and to the front left. Exactly where you dodged the previous times. So that's never been something that I ever struggled to deal with. It's always been something that I could just like see where they're moving and then move to the open spot. But it does help to know which way they're going to go because they remember how you dodged it the previous times. Luckily though, it's pretty easy boss, so even with slightly subpar damage there because of my messed up combustion right at the start, we take it down very easily and finish the dungeon in time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. I know that I did. Definitely look forward to kind of reworking some of my UI elements because I think they definitely betrayed me here for a little bit. So look for that in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.